Chapter 8, April 1st, 1862. The day dawned dry and clear. A bored sentry, tired after a long wet night of guard duty, looked across the valley and blinked in surprise. Coming toward him was a small man in torn overalls. He had a mop of woolly hair, his skin was streaked brown, and he was waving a red bandana tied to a mud-stained rifle. Cuff cut off the young soldier's bumbling questions. "Get your lieutenant," he said crisply. "I have urgent business at headquarters." Some 10 minutes later, Agent Franklin Thompson was sitting across from his contact, Colonel Shrub. The adjutant waited in suspense, tapping his fingers anxiously on the desk. With a grin, Thompson pulled off his shoe and spread out his notes and diagrams. For the next half hour, he briefed the colonel on everything he'd seen and done. He described the different gun batteries, the new fortifications, the size of the enemy encampment. He told the colonel about the fake cannons, and finally of the rebel spy who'd been posing for months as a friendly peddler. The adjutant, delighted with his report, asked Thompson to wait while he went to inform General McClellan. Some time later, the commander himself came to shake Thompson's grimy hand and personally thank him for all he'd accomplished. Private Thompson was dazed and flattered. Then he remembered the handsome Enfield carbine. He started to put it on the desk, but the adjutant waved it away. "Keep the rifle, Thompson," he said. "You've earned a souvenir." Later in the chaplain's cabin, Emma Edmonds scrubbed off the remaining brown stain and changed into her regular uniform. It was a luxury for her to be clean again and in familiar clothes. Mrs. Butler, overjoyed, bustled about the kitchen, and over a mug of coffee and a bracing bowl of hot soup, Emma finally relaxed. While her friend listened in amazement, Emma recounted her adventures, careful to avoid the military secrets. The chaplain's wife beamed happily. The major and I prayed for you night and day," she said, going to the door with Emma. "I walked beside you, my dear. Praise the Lord, it's all over, and you got it out of your system." Emma smiled and hugged her friend, but said nothing. Private Thompson's welcome at the medical tent was less joyous, but he knew Dr. Hodes was pleased to have him back. "'Bout time you returned up," the doctor grumbled. "Don't know or care what all the tomfoolery was, but I'll remind you that I'm trying to run a hospital. We have a great deal of work to do here, and I venture we'll have even more before too long." The doctor's words were prophetic. Thompson's report, plus information from captured rebels, gave McClellan the facts he needed. 3 days after the private's return, McClellan ordered an all-out attack. The Confederate generals knew they were outnumbered and outgunned. Quaker cannons might fool enemy eyes, but they couldn't stop an advance. The rebels began to fall back, but further to the north, General Joseph Johnston had built up a large army for a drive on Washington. He quickly detached thousands of these men and rushed them south to defend Yorktown. Within sight of their goal, the Union troops were stopped and had to dig in for a long siege. Every day brought fierce new battles and skirmishes and many new casualties. The hospital, once calm and placid, became a scene of hectic, feverish activity. As wounded men came flooding in, all regular nursing shifts were dropped. Franklin and the others worked around the clock, taking time only for a quick meal and a few hours of exhausted sleep. To the steady rumble of gunfire, he assisted the surgeons at the operating table, cleaned and dressed wounds, carried food and water to suffering patients, and tried to comfort the dying. Emma's war, no longer a grand, colorful pageant, became a nightmare of endless fighting, bleeding bodies, and weary men. But through it all, she clung to her belief in the Union's cause and its future. The siege dragged on until the Army of the Potomac finally took Yorktown at the beginning of May, 5 weeks after Private Thompson's spy mission. Fighting a stubborn rear guard action, the rebels headed north, and the Union troops followed. In different parts of the country, other major battles were taking place, but on the Virginia Peninsula, McClellan's men fought their way slowly toward the Confederate capital. Then a period of heavy rain began. Torrents turned the roads to mud, slowing the advance. The mud got so deep that the artillery and supply trains took 36 hours to move a short 5 miles. Soon the Union forces faced yet another obstacle, the Chickahominy River, stretching from Williamsburg to a point east of Richmond. By mid-May, parts of the river were in Union hands, but much was still under rebel control. General McClellan ordered a bridge built across the barrier out of range of enemy cannon fire. The bridge had to be large enough to carry horse-drawn artillery as well as foot soldiers. It would take weeks to finish. Meanwhile, the Southerners were improving their defenses. At Union headquarters, the officers studied their maps and shook their heads. It was downright irritating. In some places, Federal troops were only 3 miles from Richmond. At other points, the front was vague and uncertain. Of course, the rebels would fight like fiends to protect their capital, but where would they make their stand? What type of defenses were they setting up? Everyone agreed that more information was needed. A daring agent would have to slip across the Chickahominy, penetrate the enemy lines, and bring back the answers. But who could do the job? Discussing the possibilities, McClellan remembered the success of young Frank Thompson at the Battle of Yorktown. Quickly, he sent for the adjutant, Colonel Shrub. Meanwhile, Private Thompson kept up his weary rounds at the hospital, nursing the sick and wounded, completely unaware that he was on the brink of another strange and dangerous mission.